I never expected my own brother's wedding to become the moment that changed how I saw myself and my family. Growing up, I was always the quiet sibling. The good girl, the one who followed rules, stayed in the background, and was rarely noticed in family gatherings unless someone needed a favor or help with something boring like setting the table or proofreading resumes. My younger brother, Ryan, on the other hand, had always been the golden child. Charming, loud, reckless, and yet endlessly adored. It was like the world bent around his needs and celebrated his every move, while I was expected to quietly applaud from the shadows. So when Ryan got engaged to Chloe, the social media savvy, high-maintenance whirlwind of a woman he met at a tech expo, no one was surprised that the entire family, especially my parents, went all in to plan a wedding that could have easily rivaled a celebrity event. There were meetings, tastings, rehearsals, travel arrangements, all consuming. But despite being Ryan's only sibling, I was barely involved. Initially, I tried not to take it personally. I told myself it was just how things were. I lived in another city, after all, and my work as a cybersecurity consultant often kept me traveling. I figured maybe they just assumed I was too busy. But when Chloe created a WhatsApp group titled Team Wedding and I wasn't even added to it, I knew it wasn't about logistics. They simply didn't want me involved. Still, I booked time off, bought an expensive bridesmaid dress Chloe had selected for me without asking, and flew home to attend the wedding because, well, family. When I arrived, I could feel it instantly. That cold, polished kind of exclusion. People talking around me instead of to me, decisions being made without my input, and awkward glances whenever I asked simple questions like where I'd be seated or what time the rehearsal dinner was. My mother even had the audacity to suggest I just relax and enjoy things, as if my absence from the actual process was a gift. My father avoided conversations with me altogether, buried in some spreadsheet Chloe's wedding planner had sent over. But the worst was yet to come. The night before the wedding, at the formal family dinner, Chloe gave a little impromptu toast to everyone who made this wedding possible. She thanked her parents first, then her best friend, then Ryan's best man. Then, oddly enough, she thanked Ryan's boss, Mr. Caldwell, CEO of a major tech conglomerate, for flying in from New York. She didn't mention me. At all. Not even a throwaway line. I was sitting 3 seats down from her, smiling politely, clapping when everyone else clapped, and feeling every beat of my heart echo like a betrayal. When she finished, Ryan leaned over, clinked his glass with hers, and said, "Couldn't have said it better." That was the moment something snapped inside me. I didn't say anything, didn't storm out, but the emotional current had changed. I wasn't going to play invisible anymore. The next morning, I arrived at the venue early. I wore the bridesmaid dress as instructed, did my hair and makeup to perfection. Not for anyone else, but for me. I had barely walked into the lounge when I heard one of Chloe's cousins say in a low voice, "Oh, there's the spinster sister. Still working with computers, I think." The other cousin giggled. Probably still single too. I didn't react, but my blood turned cold. They didn't know, of course, that I had just returned from consulting on a high-security project for a global bank, or that I had quietly built a reputation as one of the most in-demand independent security consultants in the region, or that I had just signed a retainer with a Fortune 500 company, because no one in my family ever bothered to ask what I did. To them, I was just good old quiet Emily with a computer thing. Then came the actual ceremony. Photos, music, endless speeches. As usual, I was expected to stand, smile, and be grateful. But I noticed something odd. During the reception, Mr. Caldwell, yes, the same CEO Chloe had gushed about the night before, was standing by the bar. Alone. I figured I had nothing to lose, so I walked over and introduced myself. "Emily Walker," I said. "Ryan's sister. We haven't met properly." He shook my hand firmly. "Emily Walker, wait. Are you the Emily Walker? The security consultant?" His expression changed in an instant. It was like he had seen a ghost. "I've read your white paper on zero trust frameworks. It made rounds in our internal comms last year." That single moment, it was like lightning struck. In the middle of a wedding where I was considered background noise, the most powerful person in the room had just identified me, not as Ryan's sister, but as someone who mattered. I tried to remain calm. That's kind of you to say. I do some independent consulting now. He looked around, almost confused. Why didn't anyone mention that you were Ryan's sister? You should have been seated at the head table. Suddenly, I realized the illusion was cracking. For so long, my worth had been invisible within my own family. But in the eyes of someone who didn't carry all their bias and blindness, I was seen, respected, acknowledged. We spoke for nearly 15 minutes, covering everything from zero-day vulnerabilities to ethics in AI deployment. When Chloe's mother tried to usher him away for photos, he politely said he'd be right there, then turned back to me. Let me know if you're open to discussing a project with us.
Here's my card.
And by the way, it's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am.
Mom.
I could practically feel the air shift around us. That single word, uttered in the middle of a wedding that had treated me like I didn't exist, hit louder than any speech, louder than any toast. It turned heads. I felt Chloe glance over. I saw Ryan's posture shift. My father narrowed his eyes. And just like that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the sister who faded into the background. I was someone they had underestimated. And they were about to find out just how big of a mistake that was. The moment Mr. Caldwell walked away, the atmosphere around me became visibly tense, as if someone had pulled back a veil and everyone finally saw what they had chosen to ignore. It wasn't long before whispers began to spread among the guests, glances suddenly shifting toward me, not with pity or amusement, but something closer to curiosity, perhaps even respect. I didn't need validation, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like poetic justice. For so long, I had watched my family place people on pedestals for superficial charm and social clout, while quietly dismissing my accomplishments simply because they weren't loud or flashy. But in this one twist of fate, someone they all admired had acknowledged me in a way none of them ever had. I didn't flaunt it, didn't announce what had happened, but I could see the ripples in every interaction that followed. Ryan avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the evening, as if he wasn't sure whether to be embarrassed or threatened. Chloe's smile became thinner, tighter, and her tone more clipped. She had spent months crafting a hierarchy where she and her circle ruled the narrative, and I was an easy accessory to ignore. Now, that illusion was slipping through her manicured fingers. After dinner, as the guests transitioned to the dance floor, I moved quietly to the back of the hall and stood by one of the tall glass windows, overlooking the outdoor terrace. The music swelled and laughter echoed, but I was somewhere else entirely, lost in the swirl of realizations. This wasn't just about a wedding or a passing moment of recognition. It was about a lifetime of being underestimated. I thought about the countless birthdays where my achievements were overshadowed by Ryan's mediocre triumphs. About the Christmas when I had received a generic coffee mug while Ryan was gifted a down payment for his first car. About every time I was told I was too intense when I tried to talk about my work, or too serious when I didn't laugh at demeaning jokes about my job. And through it all, I had internalized the idea that silence and humility were virtues, that recognition wasn't necessary as long as I knew my worth. But now I was beginning to question whether that quiet endurance had allowed others to rewrite my narrative without contest. A few minutes later, my cousin Jenna approached me, wine glass in hand, her voice dripping with faux sincerity as she commented on how cool it must be to have a tech job and how she totally remembered reading about some cybersecurity breach in the news and thinking of me. Her attempt at flattery was thinly veiled opportunism, and I gave her a polite smile, watching as her eyes flicked toward Mr. Caldwell in the distance, like a social climber calculating her next move. I excused myself and walked out to the terrace, needing air, needing space from the sudden onslaught of interest from people who had never cared to see me before. The crisp evening breeze was a relief, the music muffled behind the glass. As I stood there, watching fairy lights twinkle against the night sky, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. It shouldn't have taken someone else's validation for them to see me, but it had. And now that they did, I wasn't sure what came next. A few moments later, my mother came outside, her expression unreadable. She joined me in silence, her arms crossed against the chill. When she finally spoke, it was to say that Mr. Caldwell had mentioned me in passing while thanking the family for the event, and how impressed he seemed. She said it as though she had known all along what I was capable of, as if this was all old news. I let her words hang in the air, not bothering to correct the revisionist tone. My mother had always been adept at reshaping events to fit the narrative she preferred, and I had no interest in participating in that dance anymore. Instead, I simply nodded, thanked her for letting me know, and turned back toward the dark horizon, where a few stars had started to appear. It wasn't worth arguing over. Some things no longer needed proving. Later that night, when the cake had been cut and the crowd had thinned, I began gathering my things. I had stayed longer than I intended, mostly out of courtesy. As I walked past the reception area, Chloe brushed by me, stopping just long enough to flash a brittle smile. She commented that she had no idea I worked in cybersecurity and that it was super niche, like a hobby that had accidentally become a career. I recognized the tactic immediately. Diminish what you don't understand. I didn't respond, just kept walking, and left her standing there, unsettled by my indifference. As I stepped out of the venue, into the quiet embrace of the parking lot, I finally felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't need them to validate my success. I had built a life of substance and impact without their applause, and I would continue to rise without their permission. What they didn't realize was that the Emily they thought they knew had evolved. I had spent years building strength behind the curtain, and now the curtain had fallen. They could no longer ignore me, but more importantly, I had stopped seeking their acknowledgement. I had my own stage now, and they weren't the audience I was performing for. The days following the wedding felt oddly peaceful, almost like the quiet that follows a storm. I returned to my city, my apartment, and my work with a renewed clarity. What had once been a subtle ache, the constant need to be acknowledged by my family, had dulled into something easier to carry. I had no illusions that things would change overnight, or perhaps at all. But I no longer felt the weight of invisibility pressing on my chest. What I had gained in that fleeting moment with Mr. Caldwell wasn't just external recognition. It was internal validation, a realization that I no longer needed to justify my worth to people who had never cared to understand it. Back in my office, I dove headfirst into a new project involving AI security protocols for an international law firm and found my focus sharper, my decisions more confident. That small shift, knowing I had the power to redefine how I saw myself, was transforming every aspect of my life. About a week later, I received a message from Mr. Caldwell's executive assistant requesting a virtual meeting. Curious but cautious, I agreed. When we spoke, he expressed interest in bringing me on as a strategic consultant for a confidential cybersecurity initiative involving several Fortune 500 companies. The offer came with a generous retainer and the freedom to work remotely. I accepted, not for the title or the paycheck, but because it felt like a natural next step in the path I had carved for myself. That evening, I thought about how my family would respond to this news, and then I stopped myself. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to call my parents or tell Ryan. I no longer craved their approval. The moment I realized that was the moment I truly stepped out from the shadow they had kept me in for decades. Inevitably, word traveled. A week after the offer went public on LinkedIn, I started receiving messages from extended family members. Some were laced with backhanded compliments, others with thinly veiled surprise, as if my success had come out of nowhere. My mother called and left a voicemail saying she heard about the job and thought we should catch up. I didn't return the call. Ryan sent a text congratulating me, followed by a link to an article where Mr. Caldwell had mentioned me by name. Chloe followed me on Instagram. I accepted none of it. I had learned that proximity to my success didn't mean my family had changed. It only meant they now saw value in associating with something they had once ignored. I was no longer interested in relationships that were conditional on visibility. My peace had become too valuable to trade for shallow validation. In the months that followed, I invested in myself more deliberately than I ever had before. I attended cybersecurity summits, not just as a participant, but as a keynote speaker. I collaborated on a white paper that was picked up by multiple international think tanks. I took weekends off, something I had rarely done before, and traveled, not for work, but for joy. In Morocco, I hiked into the Atlas Mountains and watched the sunrise from a cliffside lodge. In Kyoto, I wandered ancient temples with no agenda. In Italy, I learned to make pasta by hand in a tiny village no one in my family could pronounce. And each time I boarded a plane back home, I felt a deeper sense of belonging, to myself, not to any place or person. I was no longer trying to earn a seat at someone else's table. I was building my own. Then, one spring afternoon, I received an invitation in the mail, an embossed, gold-trimmed envelope addressed to Ms. Emily Walker. Inside was an invitation to Ryan and Chloe's baby shower. The envelope smelled faintly of perfume and was clearly expensive. There was no personal note, no acknowledgement of the silence that had grown between us, just the assumption that I would attend. I stared at it for a moment, amused at the irony. The girl who had been uninvited from group chats and ignored during family toasts was now being summoned as a guest of honor. I considered tossing it in the bin, but instead, I placed it in a drawer, where it could remain as a reminder of how far I had come. When the day of the baby's shower arrived, I didn't go. Instead, I spent the afternoon mentoring two young women in tech who reminded me of a younger version of myself. Smart, determined, and uncertain if there was space for them in rooms where their worth wasn't yet recognized. I shared my story, not the dramatic parts, but the truth about resilience, boundaries, and the slow, powerful reclaiming of your own narrative. Watching their eyes light up as they saw what was possible for them was worth more than any toast at a family event. That evening, I sat on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, my city buzzing quietly around me. The sky was soft with clouds, the kind that carry light rather than storms. I thought back to the wedding and the look on my brother's face when Mr. Caldwell had called me ma'am. That moment had broken a dam, but the river that followed wasn't made of vengeance. It was made of clarity. I didn't need them to see me anymore, because I saw myself, clearly, wholly, without apology.
And that was enough.
Maybe one day, my family would understand what they had failed to nurture. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, I had stopped waiting for them to catch up. My life, my voice, my value, they belonged to me now. And I had no intention of ever giving them away again.